Called balls or testicles? Are you suffering from small ball syndrome? Are you lacking baldness and testicles bursting out of your Daisy Dukes? If you're a guy and you want to increase that ball size, that testosterone, that testicles power, if you want to see balls busting out of your Daisy Dukes, head on over to chalk.com right now, and I'm going to explain what they have. Toxic masculinity. Grow your balls right now with chalk.com. Head on over to choq.com. Use the promo code J50 to increase your toxic masculinity, aka your testicles size. Do it right now. You can go to chalk.com right now and get a hold of the male vitality stack. We're talking about Tonkat Ali, proven to boost testosterone. We're talking about the Chalk Daily. We're talking about ashwagandha. All of these are able to fill in what's missing in our nutrient deficient diets. If you're looking for the standard when it comes to safety, potency, and transparency, all of the ingredients at Chalk are properly tested. In fact, they source the highest quality adaptogens straight from the rainforest. They put them through a cold-pressed strategy of purification that is unmatched anywhere else. These are the best supplements out there. I can attest to it. This is what you want if you're looking to increase your toxic masculinity points by at least 1 zillion. Jamie, my wife, is a huge fan of the stacks that are applicable to women. They have stacks for the ladies as well. She takes the She Legit. She takes the Irish Moss. Both of those are great for ladies, balancing out hormones, focusing your mental clarity so that you can plow through zillions of books like Jamie does in such an amazing way. Don't you, Jamie? Yes. And she also loves the chocolate, which is an excellent superfood additive, especially for your morning smoothie regimen. Of course, ladies, you're not going to grow your balls. You're not going to grow testicles. Don't worry. That's only for the stacks for men. Increasing that testosterone, baby. Head on over right now to chalk.com, choq.com. Put in the promo code JAY50, JAY50, to get 50% off any of these excellent products over at chalk.com. Also, if you want to put in recurring subscription, you can do that so that you don't have to put this information back in every month, right? We can even expand over into the sections here where the products are listed according to mood, according to hormone, according to detox, according to superfood, you name it. It's all easily accessible right here for you. Again, in the male or the ladies stacks, STAQ stack. Now, the promo code for that is J53Life. That will give you 53% off recurring subscriptions. That's J53LIFE only at chalk.com. It's been a great conversation. I'd like to have more. I'd love to come on your podcast, and I'd love to have you back on. I think you and Jamie are going to do a podcast too. So guys, be on the lookout for that in the future. If you're watching this, also subscribe to ChillerQueen. Let's get to the Anthill kids. And this is amazing because I had, for whatever reason, I wrote 2 books on cults. Been studying cults for years, 15, 20 years. And I didn't know about the Anthill kids. There's always another cult that you've never heard of out there. Right?
Yeah.
There's always more.
And this one was insane.
It is. It's crazy. It's Dahmer level stuff. Like, yeah. I was like,
it's wow. Sadistic. In fact, like when I started, towards the end, the episode's really long, and I go in depth about things because I want everyone to know about his life and how he came all the way to where he was. But towards the end, I was kind of like, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then he did this. And it was like rambling off all of these sadistic things that he did to the members of his cult. And he didn't have, a massive cult. He had, around 11 members. And then he had like 26 children. But the brainwashing that was put on these people, and these were smart people. Like he had some people who were, a nurse and a physician and a psychologist who he had been consulting with. And these people were completely brainwashed to the point where this guy could perform surgeries. He could break people's legs with a sledgehammer. He could, leave kids out in the snow to die. And then you know, these people think that what he was doing was from God.
You know what? The first thing it reminded me of is, did you look into John of God when all that came out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he reminded me of that.
Yeah, like he would do these operations from far away,
home
or
surgery.
yeah, like. But this guy, with John of God, he did some things on the people, but a lot of it he did from like a spiritual standpoint of like, I'm operating on you with my hands and blah blah blah. But Rosh Terrio, what he did was he was really, so he had like a 7th grade education. He didn't go on after that, but he was really, really smart. He was charismatic. He got into the Seventh Day Adventist Church. And that's how initially it started. And then he started getting his own followers while he was ministering as a Seventh Day Adventist. And these people started, like he was better looking at the time. People thought that he was good looking. And so he had a lot of women followers who were
it's okay.
following him.
You still have a crush on Rosh. It's okay.
No, I definitely do not. Well, I mean, I do like beards, but like definitely not his. So no, he had like a ton of women, followers initially. And so he basically said that he was a prophet of God. And then he even said he was like Moses, so he started calling himself Moses. And that the only way to heaven, or not to heaven, but to survive Armageddon, was to follow him and let him be a leader. And that all of the wrongdoings that he would do were actually just yes, exactly, that guy, super super hot. He's pretty good looking. But the wrong things that he would do was just basically the wrath of God. He would tell his followers that what he was doing was just God's wrath on humans, and that because Jesus was that he had no sins, that he was basically like the second Christ, and that God needed somebody who was mortal and that had human, sin like qualities. And so he was basically like the second Christ. And so he was a sinner and he could relate to the people. And so his followers followed him. And what he would do is, in the beginning, he started off with, there wasn't much violence. He basically isolated them and started his brainwashing of the commune, which eventually turned into more and more sadistic things that he would do to the people in the commune. He had his own children, and then he had children who were not his children. And the children that were not his children were taken care of by someone who was psychiatrically deprived. He was from a psychiatric hospital. His name was Paul Veer, and he would have him look after the children that were not his. And this guy, the children that were not his were actually taken away from the commune, and they were put into foster homes. And the things that they observed with these children was that, they didn't talk very well. They would beat their heads against the wall. They would hold on to their food because they didn't want anyone to take it. They would crawl. They didn't have very good vocabulary.
Right.
There was just a lot of social issues and things like that. And then he would do surgeries on some of the people in his commune, and the surgeries actually like consisted of circumcision. There was a uterus that popped out of one of the commune, or one of his wives.
Yeah.
And he laid her down on a table and basically tried to perform the surgery by punching the uterus back into her body. And like there was another commune member that was complaining of abdominal pain, and he said, okay, we're going to have to do surgery on her. And then he laid her down, and he shoved a tube down her throat and had all of the members blow air down the tube into her throat. And then he also did an enema on this person and put olive oil and molasses up into her, and then basically took the organs out of her body doing surgery, and then had another commune member sew her up, and then gave her hot and cold baths. And basically the next day she died. But he would do these things to the people in his commune. And if he wanted to punish anybody for talking back to him or any of that kind of stuff, one of his favorite things was to, put a person out in the snow naked for hours and sit outside. He would have other members take a sledgehammer and break the legs of other members. He did so many, like he would pull the teeth out of the members that, like if they were talking back, like he pulled 11 teeth out of one of the members, like the teeth didn't have anything wrong with them, but he would pull the teeth out of them. Like he did so many sadistic things, and he killed quite a bit of the members of his commune. But he the whole time he had the police and what it was, I think it was like called CAP, or it's like the American CPS, watching him the entire time. And so it was finally, eventually he went to prison for the last murder. But the weird thing is that throughout the whole process as well, he would be labeled by the media as like a gentle mountain man. And wow. And he was very charismatic. So anybody who would come to the commune and start questioning some of the things that he was doing, he would host these dinners for them, and he would bake them things. And
he's just a harmless Rasputin. I mean, basically,
yeah, exactly. But they ordered him to do psychological evaluations twice, and during those psychological evaluations, they said that this guy was fine, and he didn't come off as crazy or any of that kind of stuff. And he even made friends with a psychiatrist that that was a Mormon who was into polygamy, and so they kind of supported each other.
That immediately, when you got into the Mormon element, that immediately raised flags with circles of the fundamentalist Mormon stuff has long been documented to, be engaged in these pedo type things, right? Mm-hmm. Do you remember the whole story with Warren Jeffs? That was a big national story, right? So, the other thing that stuck out too is when you talked about his upbringing, which I didn't. The more I thought about it, his father being a white beret involved in a Roman Catholic fascist organization, that is an immediate red flag right there, because that would be so many of these Roman Catholic organizations are involved in a lot of this, abuse stuff. So mm-hmm. what is there any evidence that he was abused perhaps by his father or some of those circles?
He said that he was abused by his family, but there is no real research or evidence.
Just his word.
Yeah, just his word.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, because he has this, you said, then intense hatred of Roman Catholicism afterwards, mm-hmm. which leads him to one of the most anti-Catholic cults, which is Seventh-day Adventism. I know about Seventh-day Adventism fairly well too. I've had multiple debates in the past with Seventh-day Adventist people. And the Seventh-day Adventists themselves are a weird cult based on the writings of Ellen G. White, who proclaimed herself a prophet. So they follow the Bible, but they're kind of a weird end times thing that doesn't really follow the Bible and mainly follow the writings of Ellen White. And she was a big promoter of vegetarianism and these weird diets. And diet actually plays a role in this because, of course, cult leaders want to control your diet. And if you don't get a good, I'm very much pro keto carnivore. And so these kibble and roughage based diets, basically like rabbit diets, you're minerally deficient when you don't get meat fats, in my view. And cult leaders love that, especially like gurus and yogis, because they don't want you to be able to critically think. So if you're nutrient deficient and you're eating a bunch of shrubs and bushes. Like, you're not going to be able to critically think about how the cult leader is manipulating you. So that was something that stuck out too, that he had that weird diet, which he borrowed out of his holistic background, which I'm not against holistic stuff, but I'm saying in principle, like, he's clearly taking these elements of the weird vegetarian Seventh-day Adventist strictures, whatever he learned throughout his holistic period, and then when he gets into the Mormon stuff, that was perfect for his ideas of polygamy and basically becoming this sort of Old Testament patriarch where he sees himself as Moses having a bunch of wives. But then what was the deal with total sobriety? Like, so would he just kind of go back and forth through these phases of being sober, but then he would fall back into being an alcoholic? Was it just a sort of a flip-flopping, or what do you think was going on there?
Well,
was there other drugs, or was it just alcohol?
It was just alcohol, but originally like when he was married, before all this stuff happened, he started drinking heavily. And once he became a Seventh-day Adventist, he adopted their strict rules of their nutrition and no alcohol and things like that. And so that's when he quit drinking and, got on the health train, and started implementing that to his followers. Well, he eventually basically started drinking again during that time. And it started off slow. It started with like beer, and then it started off with the wine, and then it started turning more into like hard liquor and things like that.
He just straight up gave drunk sermons. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, he would give drunk sermons. Like usually it was only when he was drunk that it said that the people in the congregation had to hide in the forest away from him until he was sober, because he would do these crazy things when he would drink. And so it was like, that's why I'm saying is like, when I was thinking about what you were talking about when it comes to putting your mind in an altered state and being heavily influenced by like demonic forces and things like that. Because when he would become sober, he would cry out to God, and he would cry and say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do all these things. I don't want to be a conduit for the wrath of God anymore. But then when he was drunk, he would turn into a completely different person, and he would do these operations, and he would, beat the children and do all these different types of things. And so it was, they would go through these spurts of like 6 months where there wouldn't be any issues. He would still have high control over his commune. Like, he would ration out their portion sizes for food, and he would make sure that they couldn't have certain amounts of food or certain types of things. But it's, when he started like drinking and doing all that kind of stuff, that's when you really saw a different side of him. And so it was like these moments where he was sober, you didn't get much information about the commune. And so that's why I thought it was really interesting that, the whole thing, when you're talking about being heavily influenced under the influence.
I think that can sort of trigger the underlying problems or even the demonic element. So I think that's probably what was happening, was that when he fell back into his old patterns, he, whatever was in him was coming out. It reminded me of.
Then he had upside down crosses too. So what he would do, so when he there was a portion that I talked about in my podcast when he would talk about doing these rituals with children, and he wanted to teach his children certain types of rituals. And so he would bring them out into the middle of the forest, and he would be naked. And these goats that his kids would raise from, the time that they were babies, he would skin them, and then he would bathe himself in the blood of the goat.
That's straight up like generational satanic stuff there. That's what pops up in a lot of the confirmed SRA cases.
And there would be upside down crosses. There were all kinds of rituals that would happen with that specifically. And that would oftentimes happen when he was drinking. And so that, and he would talk about 666 often, like Marie Scranier was one of the outsiders of his commune, that he, was one of his outsider wives who he made sleep outside of the hut, and he said that she had a birthmark that looked like 666, and so he made her sleep outside in a hut. And so yeah, he would do these like sacrifices with his children and bathe in their blood, and yeah, there were so many things that he did.
Well, and he built a stone altar. I mean,
Yes.
presumably because, with this Seventh-day Adventist split, he's coming from a very attached to the Old Testament sort of approach. So he's like thinking, oh, I'm like Moses and Abraham. I need to build a stone altar. But it sounds like if he's also doing this stuff with upside down crosses, that there's also perhaps a straight up satanic element going on here, not just some weird fringe version of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. That's a really key indicator there. Plus the pedo stuff. I mean, this makes me think of two other cults. You know about the Children of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he sounds a lot like Moses
Mm-hmm.
Berg of the Children of God cult. Again, another guy who takes the name Moses. And then, do you know about the Source Family cult?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a lot like Father Yod as well in the way that he's sort of running his harem. By the way, did you know that Father Yod was a contract killer?
No.
Yeah, before he became a cult leader, he was an assassin, and somehow had, presumably from killing, had like $1 million. And he starts one of the first vegetarian restaurant in LA.
Wow.
And it was
Of
like a hip
course.
place. And Steve McQueen, Woody Allen, all these famous Hollywood people back in the 70s would hang out at Father Yod, or I think it's late 60s, early 70s. They were hanging out at Father Yod's um, vegetarian restaurant, and this is actually what led to the cult. So he got really into the Eastern mysticism and all that, and becomes a guru. And then it turns into a ritual magic cult where he's into like Crowley and sex magic, right? So
Yeah.
similar patterns, where it turns into something more explicitly satanic eventually
Yeah.
down the road.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one really screams all of the elements of something else is going on. If the authorities know about this, they're just sort of watching it. There's straight up consistent abuse of kids,
Yep.
satanic altars. I mean, this one is up there. This one
Well,
definitely.
he
Yeah.
goes to a psych ward, and he's basically deemed as this gentle mountain man, basically, to the public. He had articles written about him after he was taken away, and they, some of the followers that had left before any of like these heinous crimes happened, they said that the cult was democratically run, and so
Oh well,
people
if
would
it's a democratically run pedo cult, right? Then it's
yeah,
then it's all right, right? Because it's
yeah.
democratic.
And then he gets these kids taken away, right? And the kids were talking about, and so they came in and did an investigation on him, and the place that did an investigation on him actually congratulated him, or basically said, I think it's great the way that you are implementing on your children.
Wow.
And it's
Okay.
those types of things that you go, how, like,
Well,
I look at certain people and I go, wow, you basically got the shit end of the stick for doing one thing. And then I look at these other people who are consistently in the eyes of the law doing heinous acts, and they're getting slaps on the wrists over and over. I mean, for somebody who is getting charged for and then giving their children back to the guy,
well,
and demanded that the children go back to the
suggests,
commune.
yeah, that to me suggests higher level connections and cover up. I mean, do you know about the Picton Pig Farm?
No.
I mean, if you want a wild, this is another one of this is up there with Dahmer and Gary Heidnik. This is a Canadian serial killer case that goes up to the wealthiest people in Canada. I don't remember where that is in relationship to this guy's commune, but I mean, this stuff is pretty prominent in Canada, and in fact, it seems to be places connected to the UK. I mean, it's the Commonwealth countries, Canada, Australia, that are really rife with this kind of deeper cult activity, and this is no exception. In fact, this is a big one that I can't believe I didn't know about it. But is there anything else you want to bring out about the Anthill Kids? It was an end times cult too. Keep this in mind. Mm-hmm. So he bogusly predicts the end of the world, as we see with Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, also an end times cult that they've falsely predicted the end of the world, I think 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he specifically calls the children animals too. That was very weird, because if he's calling the kids that aren't the firstborn of his animals and they're subservient to his slave, yeah, then that to me also suggests an attitude of perhaps human sacrifice and or trafficking, right? Because if you remember in the John of God case, it came out that he had a whole stable of women that were breeders. Mm-hmm. Did you know that? Do you remember mm-hmm. that? Now that was in the conspiracy world. People said forever, oh well, there's these people that have breeders where they breed children just for cults and trafficking. And, oh, it's a stupid conspiracy theory, doesn't exist. And then it comes out that no, actually in the John of God case it exists. So we know that this does exist. And I don't know what happened to the kids in this case. It doesn't sound like there were, I mean 26
well
kids.
I mean, he did exploit his own wives to go out there and be prostituted in order to gain groceries and eggs and milk to like the grocers and things like that. So that's not that, like when you said that, in my mind I was thinking a lot of this stuff probably hasn't even fully come out.
Yeah, right.
But I do know that his wives were being prostituted to local grocers in order to get like meat and eggs and milk and all that kind of stuff for the commune, because they weren't getting government assistance when they moved to Ontario. And so he had to basically emphasize on how he was going to provide for the family. And so, that wouldn't even surprise me, considering, how he went from having, just 3 children to all of a sudden 26 children over this period of time. And he was the people were constantly pregnant. And so he looked at this as like the religion that was going to pass on, his destiny. But
wow.
Yeah.
And what did he end up dying? What ended up happening to him?
He got murdered in prison.
Oh, well, by the way, I forgot to mention that to you too. A lot of these important people like this, mm-hmm. I think they end up getting killed in prison because it might lead to other people. So in other words, they're being killed on purpose in prison. Like Dahmer was killed, I think, on purpose in prison. They actually, they tried to kill Berkowitz, but he lived through it. If you remember, he got his throat slit in prison, mm-hmm. but he lived through it. But yeah, I think a lot of these people are intentionally killed in prison.
That's interesting, because that's like the Robert Maudsley. He actually is in isolation from the rest of the world. Yeah, well,
when you were talking about that, like we watched what's his name, freaking Clarice, right? We watched that not too long ago, and we were noticing a lot of symbolism in the film. I haven't read the Thomas Harris books, but in the various film installations, even going back to the 80s one, there's a lot of references to mind control and programming, disassociation, monarch program, etc. That actually pops up quite a bit throughout the Hannibal Lecter series, which I had never noticed until fairly recently. I went back and redid that, and now I definitely think that it's relating to mind control, because remember, in at least 3 of the studies, they were actively studying people like Hannibal Lecter, like the psychopathic types of people, to learn and master their psyche, and also how to train killers. So you could see why studying a serial killer would be relevant to these kinds of operations. And we were laughing at the absurdity of who is actually so dangerous and so intelligent that like you have to keep them in a glass box and they can't talk. I mean, it just seems silly, right? Like nobody's actually that dangerous that, because if you remember when they wheel out Hannibal Lecter. He's like got this giant like face mask on, and he's got a
Yes.
ball. He can't talk because if he talks to you, he might like dupe you and mind control you, right?
Mhm.
It's like, which is all ridiculous in my view. But when you were describing the actual like situation of this dude, like, have you watched the Bond films, like the recent Bond novel instantiations with Daniel Craig?
Mm-mm.
Well, they put Blofeld and the various Bond villains in. Is it Belmarsh? Is that where the serial killer was?
I
It's one of the famous British prisons where they put him
Oh
in the
yeah.
box.
Yep.
I don't remember if it's Belmarsh or Broadmoor, whatever the
No,
place
it's Broadmoor. It was
Yeah.
Broadmoor.
Okay. Well, in the Bond novels, that's where they put the Bond villains in the glass box inside. So I'm just saying it's silly. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Because I thought it was so interesting that with Robert Maudsley, they had to create an entire glass box and put him down underneath the prison.
Right. Which is what happens to Hannibal Lecter.
Yes.
Right?
But I find it weird that he can't just be in a prison cell, for 23 hours a day. He has to actually go into a glass box underneath the prison and be surrounded by everywhere he goes. He has to be surrounded by at least like 11 police officers. Like everything that he does is so controlled. And he even asked for a cyanide pill because he was like, can I have a dog? I just want a dog to like communicate with, and if I can't, then can I get a cyanide pill? Because I'm basically talking to myself in here, like going absolutely insane. So you can actually find my podcast, Chiller Queen Podcast, on all platforms that you listen to podcasts. You can go to Apple, Google, Spotify, everywhere that you listen to podcasts. My premium content channel is Rockfin. Patreon will be coming soon. I have my website that is in the creation, but it's going to be launching soon. So it's going to be ChillerQueenPodcast at gmail. Or at it's ChillerQueenPodcast.com. But the best way to get a hold of me is probably my Instagram right now, ChillerQueenPodcast at gmail.com. And you can find me on Instagram at ChillerQueenPodcast. And you can also find my personal account, which is A Very Dope Cook, because I love cooking. But you can find that's more of like my larger platform. So my Chiller Queen podcast is just my separate podcast platform.
Yeah, I'll have all that link below so everybody can definitely follow you. And this will be half and half. So half of this, I'm not sure which section I'm going to cut out some parts for public consumption, and then there'll be a subscriber half, probably for some of the more dark, disgusting, touchy things that we got into today, because we did get into quite a few dark things. But hey, thank you so much, Avery. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and look forward to coming on your podcast, and hopefully you and Jamie can do a podcast too.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Jay.
All right. Absolutely. Have a good day.